Hi, welcome to Access Tribe. I'm speaking with Hannah Rosenberg today. She is the founder of Velas Commerce. They provide e-commerce solutions, cryptocurrency integrations, blockchain education, and blockchain consulting. She's also an educator in the Bitcoin space, so I'm excited to talk to her about that. And also, she's an expert in the Lightning Network. So we'll be having a chat about the Lightning Network, what it is, and what it can do for Bitcoin adoption. With that, I'm going to hand over to you, Hannah, to introduce yourself.
Excellent. Well, hello, I'm Hannah Rosenberg. I guess I'll tell you a little bit about my history, my Bitcoin resume as it is. I've been involved in the Bitcoin space for about a decade now, just over a decade now. I developed an interest in it I developed an interest in money and in monetary theory and alternative monies while studying economics at UIC. But then worked for years as a web developer, and then fell in love with Bitcoin and came back around to now working in tech in Bitcoin. So I have a business, Velas Commerce, and we help other businesses to make use of this technology. So we have a dev team that helps people integrate Bitcoin and Lightning tech. So that's the very abbreviated version. Yes.
Amazing. It was really funny actually, because when I was reading through your LinkedIn bio, I just thought the funniest and probably the best role you've had in your whole background was stay-at-home parent.
Yes.
And what I love,
yes. Yes.
what I loved is that you wrote a whole description. So I'm just going to read it out for people because I just thought it was so funny. And I was like, everybody that's a parent should have one of these in their bio.
Yes.
So it says, so date, time period, you've got ages of kids parented, responsible for feeding, clothing, bathing, educating, and maintaining the overall welfare of 1 to 2 small children.
Yes.
The position required excellent time management and prioritization skills, as well as the ability to remain calm in a chaotic work environment and the capacity to work under pressure and without sleep.
Yes.
I was like, that's just awesome. And it's funny because it made me think back in my corporate career. I always used to notice that people who'd been parents or who were parents who were working in the corporate environment were very unflappable. And I used to think to myself, is this because you've just dealt with so much shit, like literally and figuratively, that like nothing phases you now?
Oh, it's actually, having been at home with my kids, I think for about 4 years, I can't remember what I put on there, but it was around about that time. And then when I went back to I dropped them at, preschool in the morning, and then I go to work, and then you just in an office and it's quiet and you can hear yourself think. And I was just like, this is amazing. Of course, it's very different pressures, but just that you're not in constant chaos. Like you can just be like, I'm busy right now, and people be like, oh, okay.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that probably set you up very well for running your own business. So
yes, constant different demands of all varieties. Yes. Yeah,
definitely. So, okay, so you've gone through a little bit of your blockchain background, but I'm really interested to know what the steps were for you kind of mentally in terms of your evolution, because you studied economics. So that's quite interesting that you've got a very conventional background, I guess, in monetary theory. And then you had sort of web development. So there's the technical aspect. What was your kind of orange pill moment with Bitcoin? Like when was the kind of aha where you thought, oh, this is actually really interesting and maybe kind of makes me rethink what I've learned?
Yeah. So I had studied economics at UIC, University of Illinois in Chicago, and became very interested in monetary theory. And then, I took a few classes on it there, but then I, read some books and followed different blogs and whatnot covering those sort of topics. But the thinking was then that anything that's, alternative, any community money, any money that's sort of alternative to the nation state money, fiat money, had to be commodity backed, like this is a gold backed system. So it's very much where my head was. And when I first heard about Bitcoin, it was on an econ podcast that I was listening to in 2011. And I first heard about it on that podcast and thought, but this is BS, magic internet money nonsense, literally just turned it off while I was driving to work in the morning, like, this is stupid, turned it off. But then I was working on a website about a year later and was just for experimentation thinking, can I pay for this website without using a credit card, and what other alternatives are there out there, and came back around to this Bitcoin thing. I'm like, this is ridiculous, but I looked into it and I realized that all of these other systems that I had been following, at this point, I think Liberty Reserve was still up and running, but eGold, eBullion, all these sort of systems kind of all wound up getting shut down for one reason or another. Generally, they run into some sort of legal problem, or some projects, it's just like the head of that project, just didn't do a good job of managing it and ran it down. So these projects would always just fail for one reason or another. And so it was kind of irritating to be watching this. And then I really started reading about Bitcoin and kind of started to sort of grasp how it works, and then realized you can't shut it down. Doesn't matter if, the founder of this, goes crazy and runs off and does something weird. It doesn't matter if, some authority somewhere decides it shouldn't exist. Like, you can't really shut it down. And I'm like, oh, wait, this one might actually last. And then it was like, boom, then I was in love. That was the moment for me.
So why did you care about having an alternative monetary system though? So if you're studying conventional economics, like you talked a lot about having all of these kind of community monetary projects, why were you interested in them in the first place? Like, what did you think was failing, I guess, in the
control over a monetary supply and how the money works is just such an epic concentration of power, right? And so this kind of comes back sort of some political philosophy sort of stuff, but I like to say that, like, if someone asks you what your politics are, I'm like, my politics are, I'm anti-concentrations of power, like that's like my philosophical moral worry about a lot of things that happen in government and governance and this sort of stuff. And so for me, once I kind of understood how, fiat money works, I realized that this is just this huge source of power. And sometimes you can use that for good, but also this is why some places can go to war, because they don't have to earn the money or convince people that it's appropriate to pay for that war. They can just print it and then just go off, like there are huge abuses that can happen. And of course, there's so many examples of governments just running amok with this power over money and inflating the currency and destroying the economy. So I was really concerned about that concentration of power and trying to see if there were, maybe better ways to do it. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. It's amazing that you kind of came to that realization so early on from a conventional economics background. I find that really interesting.
My dad was very into this stuff. So this was like, these type of things were dinner table conversation in my house. So no doubt that had something to do with these things being on my mind while in college. Yes.
Okay. That's good context. So then once you kind of had this realization about Bitcoin, like, where did the journey take you then in terms of what you did with that realization? Like, what happened next?
I was just instantly in love. Once I was like, oh, this might actually work, then I was like, I could pour some effort into this and it wouldn't be wasted. Like, this project might work. So at the time, and I like to joke, and it is actually technically correct, I was in a small town in Australia at home nursing a baby while my husband was out working in the coal mines. Which is, of course, he was designing roads in and out of a mine, but it is correct. So I was, doing some freelance web dev stuff here and there while, in the middle of starting a family in that phase of my life. So I had, like some blogs that I would run and would interview people and all this sorts of stuff. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I came back to Chicago and got involved with the community there and started wound up running a meetup called Bob, or the Bitcoin and Open Blockchain Meetup, and ran that for like 5 years. I also started my business so then when I went back to work, after the full-time parenthood gig, then I was doing traditional web development stuff, but started my business in 2014, mid 2014. The idea being is I'm going to do, web dev type stuff, have like a web dev type shop. Like I had been doing freelance stuff before, but instead of putting a widget on someone's website, I'm going to put Bitcoin payments on someone's website, right? Allow businesses to accept Bitcoin payments. I was a little too early to market in 2014, so that stayed as a side gig for a while. But, then I was running the meetups in Chicago, and then I think about 2018, I started doing, just by accident, sort of fell backwards into doing education stuff. just because I was running this meetup. So we would always be putting on educational sort of events. And actually wound up co-teaching a blockchain course at UIC for a few years. And then worked at a nonprofit that taught people blockchain tech for, I think, just over a year. And so, wound up, working full-time in the blockchain crypto space with some Bitcoin stuff. And then till I went full-time with my business, Velas Commerce. Yeah.
Wow. It's a really fascinating journey. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the teaching side of things, because a lot of people talk about how hard it is to build on the Bitcoin blockchain versus Ethereum.
Yeah.
And this is a question I ask a lot of people, and I'd love to get your take on it. So what you think about Bitcoin versus Ethereum and how you would really articulate the differences, and why on the Bitcoin blockchain it's less flexible or it's harder to build. And I guess, sorry, this is 20 questions in one, but like what the kind of roadmap would be for that in Bitcoin,
Yes.
as like in terms of putting smart contracts on it or anything else. I don't know if that means you have to start delving a bit into the Lightning Network, but if you could kind of give your take on that scenario, that would be really fascinating.
No, I love this question. And it's something I think about a lot, especially in some of my work trying to, provide educational stuff for developers who are looking to build on Bitcoin and Lightning. It's something I think about a lot. So the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think that they're kind of chasing different things. Like people sometimes like talk about Bitcoin, Ethereum, like they're competitors. And I think they're apples and oranges. Like they're really sort of different systems designed to do different things. Bitcoin is like this solid, stable thing, and it was built for the idea of being money, of facilitating payments, right? That was its original goal. And I think that's still the direction in which it heads, right? So it's a very solid, stable thing. Ethereum was actually built because Bitcoin wasn't flexible enough for what Vitalik wanted to do, so he went out and created his own chain that does all of the different things. So Bitcoin is like, hey, we're money. We are, value transfer protocol. Like this is what we're doing. And that's, what underpins it. It still guides it a lot. And then Ethereum is like, we're going to be this cool computer that does all these different bells and whistles and different things. So they're two different trajectories. And, a lot of times I talk to clients like, I want to do this, that, and the other thing. And they think maybe they want to use Bitcoin, or maybe they want to use Ethereum. And it just really depends what you're aiming at, like what you want to do in a lot of cases. So those are the difference between the two. And then a lot of people say, oh, it's so much easier to build on Ethereum. And there is some truth to that, because what happened is that because Ethereum was built to be the place where you do all the bells and whistles and the cool new application, et cetera, people went out and built all kinds of libraries that other developers can use for building their smart contracts, right? So for a long time, it was that if you wanted to build on Bitcoin, you really had to be fairly familiar with the Bitcoin protocol, right? And there's so many developers out there, even in the development world, there's all kinds of different development that you can do, and there's so many developers out there that want to write a really cool app. They're like, I have a very specific case. I want my users to do this and that and the other thing. I'm going to go build this application. If you say, okay, sure, but first you have to become a cryptography expert and understand this protocol, and they're going to be like, never mind, I'm going to go over there, right? So this is, that's sort of how the situation developed, where Ethereum, I think, because it was aiming sort of in a different direction, wind up building, these easy sorts, in some cases, easy to use programming languages and all these different libraries. So an application developer can just pull down these libraries and not have to worry about that protocol level. So that's kind of the way that situation happened and why people would say it's easier to use Ethereum. Now then, we do touch on Lightning a bit, because this is true of Bitcoin, that main chain, that layer one of Bitcoin is like, it's solid, right? It's this massive network. It's done amazingly well. It's really solid, but that also means building on top of it is kind of like, it's sort of, it is just this behemoth, right? And so building on top of that is a bit tricky. But now we have the Lightning Network which is, a second layer on top of Bitcoin. We can dive into that a little bit if you want. But it's on top of Bitcoin. And I think what I think we're starting to see, and I'm really, really hoping that we will see, because I think the opportunity is absolutely there, is for those developers who want to build applications and don't want to be protocol engineers, don't want to be cryptographers, right? They can build something using the Lightning Network. And so I think we're getting to the point where it'd be hard to say, oh, it's so much easier on Ethereum. I think we're getting more and more libraries and more tools where you could say, I'm going to go build that using the Lightning Network. Yeah.
So from a non-technical kind of perspective, does the Lightning Network give you those libraries and those tools that are somewhat similar to what Ethereum provides, but you have the stability of the Bitcoin blockchain?
Yes, although it's slightly more complicated. I'd say what the Lightning Network does primarily is allow you to build without having to concern yourself so much with protocol, right? Because Bitcoin is less flexible in its protocol. There might be some application that you want to build, but there would have to be a protocol change to Bitcoin in order to do that. And it would take years to, get that through the process, assuming you could get the entire global Bitcoin community to agree with you on this change, right? It's a massive undertaking. While with Lightning, because what you build on Lightning doesn't have to be compliant with everyone else in the Bitcoin community, it doesn't have to be consensus, right? It doesn't have to adhere to the Bitcoin protocol consensus rules. So you have so much more flexibility in what you can build there. Just if you and one other node on the network wants to do it this way, like, you can do that. So it has a lot more flexibility. You don't really have to adhere to, the consensus rules of the Bitcoin main chain.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Can you just describe for somebody in kind of layperson's terms what the Lightning Network is, like, to somebody who has limited knowledge of Bitcoin and wants to understand how Lightning differs? Because I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So Bitcoin, is this open, decentralized protocol, this peer-to-peer network, but it's there's all kinds of different rules that you have to adhere to, right, to be a part of this network. You have to be running compatible software, and the software is very stringent in its rules. But it's this peer-to-peer network, right? And it's amazing that this, the architecture is amazing. You can get this completely open, decentralized system to work, and it can all reach consensus. It means everyone agrees on what's happening on the network. Amazing stuff. But there's some issues with that, especially for, speed and fees on the network, right? Because Bitcoin main chain really prioritizes maintaining that decentralization, which means absolutely everyone has to know about absolutely everything that happens on that network. It's kind of bad for scaling, right? So Lightning is a way to use Bitcoin where you kind of just have more local knowledge that's happening, rather than everyone needs to know about everything on the network. So to think about how you can, first, it's really important to note that anything that happens, like a transaction on the Lightning Network, is Bitcoin. It is a Bitcoin transaction, right? It's not a separate coin. It's not a side chain, anything of that sort. It is a Bitcoin transaction. But the idea might kind of be that, let's say you and me, you have a coffee shop and I want to buy a cup of coffee, and I'm at your coffee shop every day, and I'm going to open it up and be like, or I'm going to go to your cafe every morning, and I say, I want to pay you in Bitcoin, but how about I just throw some Bitcoin into this special address here, and I'll put, $200 worth of Bitcoin in there. And every day when I come in, we're just going to update our sort of balance with each other. And we call this a channel. And so when I throw some Bitcoin into this special address, it's a channel between us. And at first, all the money is on my side. And every day, and I come in and buy a cup of coffee, I push a little bit more of that money in that channel over to your side, right? And so we're just updating this agreement with each other back and forth every day, right? And this is a channel on the Lightning Network. And then it gets a bit more complicated because maybe I want to go to Charlie's cafe one day, but perhaps you have a similar agreement with Charlie. And so I'm like, hey, I'm going to send a little bit of this money in our channel over to you. Can you forward some of that money over to Charlie? And this then creates the broader Lightning Network. And that's, so very roughly, is kind of how it works. But what this means is that when I come in and buy that cup of coffee and send you a transaction, there's a very limited amount of people that need to know about that, right? You need to know about it. I need to know about it. If I'm maybe buying something from Charlie, then both you and Charlie need to know about it because I'm routing through you. But it creates a very localized information, rather than if I did that on the Bitcoin main chain, the entire global Bitcoin network would need to know about that transaction. And the cool thing about Lightning is it's kind of, like writing a check to someone and signing it, but you don't take it to the bank. We just sort of update these checks with each other back and forth. It's sort of an old school example. People don't really use checks much anymore, but you can think of it like that. And then the cool thing about it is because these are real Bitcoin transactions, if your coffee shop just closes down overnight, or I move to another city, or whatever the case may be, or if I'm worried that you're going to try and cheat me or something, at any time I can take the current balance of our channel and broadcast that onto the main network. And that is a real valid Bitcoin transaction. So that's sort of the security of that. So it's just like a layer of abstraction on top of Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a really helpful description. Not to put you on the spot too much, but how about Taro? Because that comes up a lot in the conversations about Lightning Network. What is that? Why is it innovative, and what's it going to do?
Yeah, Taro's a whole nother, but we'll do that very briefly what it is. So Taro is Taproot Asset Representation Overlay. So it is a way to use this thing on the Bitcoin protocol called Taproot. It's a way to create assets and sort of embed them or record them in the Bitcoin blockchain. And what is really cool about this, because that concept by itself isn't unique, right? We have NFTs and all this sort of stuff. Lots of ways to record some sort of unique data in a blockchain. So this protocol lets you do this on Bitcoin. But the really interesting part about this is that, especially with fungible assets, and I hope your viewers might know what fungible is. It means something's, dollar bills are fungible because one is interchangeable with the other, right? So if you have fungible assets, then you can also take these assets that you created on the Bitcoin blockchain and then exchange them on the Lightning Network. So a use case for that is quite interesting is the idea of taking a stable coin, minting it on the Bitcoin blockchain, but then having a stable coin that you can trade on the Lightning Network. And this is really interesting because I think one of the things that holds back Bitcoin adoption sometimes is that, if we're in the first world and we're just holding on to some Bitcoin as a bit of an investment, speculation, this sort of thing, if it swings around wildly, this might affect our mood, but it doesn't really affect our ability to pay our mortgage, right? It's like, okay, fine. If you're a shop in,
Sorry, I just love that description. It might affect our mood, but
not our ability. Like if you've invested intelligently, if you haven't, mortgaged the house to, buy some Bitcoin, don't do that. Then you're going to be fine, right? But if you're a small shop, in Latin America somewhere, not in a huge city, or not, if you're just like some mom and pop shop somewhere, even in, Chicago or Puerto Rico or wherever, if you're bringing in Bitcoin and suddenly the price tanks, like that does affect your ability to pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever the situation is. So the volatility of Bitcoin has been an issue in adoption, like in people using it. So stable coins, although they've certainly had their troubles, as we've noticed lately, there's a really strong use case for it, right? I know so many people personally that, live outside the US and in places where the currency isn't that good, and they use stable coins regularly. They get paid with stable coins, So there's a strong use case for it there. But then the Lightning Network, one of the reasons I like it is I think from a technical perspective, it's just a vastly superior payment network. Like from a technical perspective, much better than, the Visas and the MasterCards and all of these sorts of networks. So you have this really amazing, very, very affordable payment network, and then you can take a stable coin and put it on that. And like, what does that combination do? Like that could be pretty amazing. So that is the sort of go-to example for Taro, but there are so many other ones. I mean, just think about like playing a video game and just like earning, tokens or rewards as you're playing this video game, which can just be streamed to you in tiny little microtransactions every second. Stuff like that could happen with that combination.
But what is it about Taro? Apologies if this is going too much down the kind of technical rabbit hole, but what is it about Taro that overlays on the Lightning Network that is additive? Like, what is it actually doing that's additive? I don't know if possible to explain that in simplistic terms.
So everything right now that happens on the Lightning Network is measured in Satoshis. Satoshis, of course, being the smallest unit of a Bitcoin, right? A tiny fraction of a Bitcoin is a Satoshi. So everything right now that happens in the Lightning Network or on the Lightning Network, all the value that's transacted is measured in Satoshis. So the idea being is that you would be able to open a channel that could, connect to the broader Lightning Network, where in that channel you could exchange Satoshis, but also perhaps a stable coin. So you could exchange ownership of a stable coin, an asset that was minted on the Bitcoin blockchain in a Lightning channel.
I see. So fundamentally, it increases the type of assets that you can transact in a channel. Got it.
And what's so interesting is maybe there's different kinds of stable coins on the Lightning Network. And we have that, this Taro right now, the main chain portion of it is built still very in alpha stage, but the off chain, the Lightning portion of it is still being built. So it hasn't happened just yet. But in theory, I could be using stablecoin X and you could be using stablecoin Y, and I could send out stablecoin X on the Lightning Network. It could go through a conversion process and you could receive stablecoin Y, right? And so this just incredible flexibility that can happen on this very fast, very cheap, very secure payment network. It's really quite interesting. Yeah.
That's incredible. What stage of I guess, development / adoption would you say that it's in? I mean, is the technology solid already and it's really just a case of people adopting it, or where is it at?
I'd say there's a lot of excitement and interest in Taro. And I know there's a lot of different teams of a number of different varieties actively planning to build on it or in the process of building on it. But right now, what's currently been released is an alpha version of Taro, which works at the moment just on chain, right? And what is being built right now is the off-chain portion of it, the portion that works on the Lightning Network. So, this will be out next year at some point. I won't try and guess exactly when, but, in 2023, that'll be out, but it'll be a while before it's really stable technology. I expect sometime next year, we might see projects starting to roll out on that maybe. Yeah.
So I guess if that kind of functionality is something that would help a project that one is conceiving of, this might be a good time to start learning about it and thinking about how to develop on that.
Absolutely. I think now would be the right time to start looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, that's fascinating. One of the big things that's a challenge, I think, in the Bitcoin space is just educating people about Bitcoin and adoption. And some of the feedback I hear on a regular basis is, oh, it's too technical. Oh, it's too complicated. I don't understand it. And there's a really cool meme that I'm sure you've seen, but it's like, explain to me how email works.
Yes.
Which for me kind of really summarizes it, because I'm like, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, nobody can really explain how email works, or there's probably a fraction of the population that could actually do it, but we all use it every day and then some.
Yes.
So I wanted to kind of touch on, I guess, two segments that I think you've got expertise on both, really, just because of your background. So the first one is just talking about education for individuals, and then obviously because of what you do with Velas as well, I wanted to talk about the business piece as well.
Yeah.
So you did a whole bunch of educating in the Bitcoin space for individuals through the meetup and through the not-for-profit that you worked for. Like, what did you see and how did you approach that? Like, what were the kind of challenges that people had in terms of understanding Bitcoin in a simple way?
Bitcoin? Well, whenever I do any sort of educational talk, video, tutorial, whatever it is, the first thing you start with is, who am I talking to? What's the target audience? And what am I trying to tell them? So target audience, learning objectives, right? So I think to try and make it understandable and interesting to people, you have to understand why are they sitting there, you know? So if you're at a conference for business professionals, right, you have to come at this from a business point of view. This is why your business could benefit from this technology. This is, that it's so much cheaper than using Visa, whatever like aspect it is that might appeal to them. You kind of have to think through that and be like, this is how I'm going to present it, right? So, and then there's different like technical, and I think not everyone, like you said, we don't understand, how email works. I know a little bit about how email works because, I'm a developer, but, even all the technology we use, like a cell phone tower, I have a very basic understanding of the technology that goes into it, but I couldn't repair a cell phone tower, right? You know what I mean? Like all these things that we use all the time. And I really think that Bitcoin Lightning adoption is going to take off when we have applications that people can use and really add value to their lives without even knowing that they're using it. When it's just running in the background and, hey, as you drive your car past this thing in this video game, boom, that number goes up. You just earned so many tokens, boom. You don't even know that's on Lightning, right? So I think that's really when we get a lot of adoption, that's what's going to happen. And so most people don't need to know how Bitcoin works, right? But then when you have developers that you're teaching, so these are people that do want to know very much how it works. And then for me, the secret there is pictures. I like pictures. Pictures for everything. I think you just have to. And then I always tell everyone too, this stuff, especially because it's so new, like a lot of times we have a hard time. You don't have like a box to put it in, because it's something that's sort of a different variety of technology that we're not used to. So a lot of times I think, like, you tell people, like, you're probably going to have to take 3 passes at it before you're really like, I understand what's happening here. Yeah.
One of the things at an individual level that I always find, so my journey was that I was like I knew about Bitcoin early on because my husband was interested in it from a technology perspective. But I was just kind of like, this sounds really boring. I'm not technical, like whatever.
Yeah.
And then, when I worked in a bank, we were very actively looking at it because all of the financial markets industry is interested in blockchain technology and having their own private blockchain networks and trying to figure out ways of essentially making the fiat, like the traditional finance or TradFi existing system, more efficient and utilizing that technology. And it was actually, for me, my orange pill moment was this podcast that somebody had sent me. Of Jordan Peterson interviewing 4 Bitcoiners. And I knew who Jordan Peterson was, and I knew he was a clinical psychologist. I think that's his day job, if you like.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just really perplexed about this because I thought, why on earth is he interviewing Bitcoiners? Like, that's so weird. That's so out of his lane.
Combination, right? Yeah.
Right. And it was interesting because Jordan Peterson had written this book, Maps of Meaning, and the people on the podcast, trying to remember now, it was Robert Breedlove, it was John Vallis, it was Gigi, and then there was another guy, something James, I think, who's a filmmaker in the Bitcoin space. And the reason that they had convened with Jordan Peterson was because they had a Bitcoin book club and they were reading Maps of Meaning and they got really interested in some of his theories. So they wanted to talk to him about Maps of Meaning. And then he was interested because he was like, how does this correlate with Bitcoin? I need to do some investigating. And it was like a 90-minute vidcast or whatever you want to call it, like a YouTube video and a podcast. And it was like the veil of ignorance was just lifted. I was like, oh my God, when I listened to this thing, I was like, this thing has been sat under my nose the whole time. And I had zero comprehension of how revolutionary it was.
Perspective that they gave you on it that suddenly made it interesting to you?
Well, so this was the thing. So they talked about like the whole fiat monetary system. And I had basically lived and breathed it for 20 years. And it was a bit like, I mean, I use this analogy all the time, and I know it's used a lot in the Bitcoin space, but it was exactly like this for me. It was like, in the beginning of the Matrix movie, and it's kind of like the voiceover or something is like, you go about your daily life and something just doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah.
It was something like that. And so I was in the financial market system thinking, this thing just doesn't seem quite right. Something's not quite right about it, but I can't figure out what it is. Like this, I'm reading, trying to understand, but it just doesn't make sense. And I'd say I understood more about the monetary system in those 90 minutes when they were talking about the context of fiat and the economy and its impact than I had in 20 years. And it was such a like gut punch I was just
Mm.
like, whoa, you know, how did I not see this thing just sitting there under my nose the whole time? Like I had no comprehension of how revolutionary that technology actually was. Um, and so one of the things I kind of struggle with sometimes is once you're orange pilled, it's like you're just falling down this rabbit hole, like you're drinking from a fire hose. You're like, oh my God, my entire world is upended. I have to relearn everything I've learned. And so sometimes I struggle with like, why don't people see how important this is?
Yes.
So I'm
Yes.
just curious, like what you saw over the meetups, because people obviously came to the meetups because they had an interest, but on an individual
Yeah.
level, sometimes I think to myself, do people not realize that this is like as important as the air you breathe? I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And I used to joke that like any Bitcoin material like should come with the warning. It said you'd be like, danger will destroy your enthusiasm for your day job. It's just like don't come near it. It's just gonna wreck you. But absolutely, I think so many people came to the meetups because they had the same experience, and they're like, no one, especially like in 2014, 2015, 2016, they're like, no one it understands, like I have to find someone else to talk to about this. And so it was kind of just like the Bitcoin addict support group. But so much fun. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a very, because it is just something that just has such huge potential. We don't know what's going to happen, but just massive, you know, political, global, economic implications, right? To just kind of the potential to fundamentally change the way a lot of our structures and systems that we're used to function, right? And I'm obviously in the camp that thinks it will be a good change, which is why I work on it all the day. But it has such massive implications and potential. And then once you see that, it's like, it's that Buddhist saying about the wheel of knowledge, right? You can't unsee it. And so
Yeah.
then it's like everything else in that light, it's just kind of like, why am I building this little widget on a website? Like I need to go do this thing over here. Yeah. And so it's a
Yeah.
very common narrative in the Bitcoin world.
So
Yeah.
do you think, like in your experience, sort of seeing individuals' responses to things or why they're attracted to it, is it that there are very different paths in life that they're in, and there's just something about the plethora of stuff that Bitcoin changes or Bitcoin fixes that
Mm-hmm.
resonates with them that kind of brings them to the party, if you like?
Yeah, it's when whatever it is that you're doing, that you're interested in, or whatever little world you're in, little niche community that you have, once you see Bitcoin and then see the impact that that can have on what you're doing, it's just like, wow, you fall in love. It's commonly how it goes. So like, I know so many people who work in the like humanitarian space, with human rights and refugees and this type of stuff, who wind up falling in love with Bitcoin because of its ability to empower people in incredibly difficult situations. Like I saw a tweet just the other day talking about, I don't know if it's happened, but there's some talk in Iran, what's happening with the protests there, and the women are getting arrested for not covering their hair and all this stuff. And there was some, I'm not sure it was a politician or some regulator that's starting to say, well, if we catch you, not covering your hair, we're going to freeze your bank account.
That's right. My
Yeah.
understanding is it's two text warnings, and after the second warning, they'll freeze your bank account. Yeah.
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 And so just when you're someone who's like trying, if you're, and this is a really good and recent example, or really clear and recent example. But this type of stuff, happens all over the world, where access to banking and access to money, if it's centrally controlled, can then be used as a tool of control. And so I think people who do a lot of humanitarian sort of work realize that, and realize that this is a tool that is outside the control of this particular power structure, which is not serving its people well. And so, whatever the case may be, wherever it is you're working, once you realize the impact that this technology has on what you're doing, it's just, so.
That's fascinating. So can we talk about the business side of it a bit? Because you're very enmeshed in onboarding businesses into Bitcoin. So does that include, I guess you're obviously dealing with the technical side. So business comes to you and says, I want to accept payments. How do I do it? Can you on-ramp me, whatever.
Yeah.
Is there an element of, like, I guess, why do they come to you? So what's the light bulb moment for them? And is there an element of advocacy that you do as well, just to say this is what businesses should be doing? So like, why should a business care? Why should they be focusing on this?
So I do all kinds of advocacy stuff, but when it comes to the clients for Velas, generally the vast majority of our clients are people that I know via like my extended network, right? So I have some sort of friend that I met, at a meetup 5 years ago, right? And their friend talks to them and says, hey, I'm thinking about making use of Bitcoin. How on earth would I do that? And they're like, hey, I know someone you should talk to, right? So the vast majority of the time, that's how customers wind up coming to Velas. And so generally, once they reach us, like the advocacy portion of that is done, right? They're showing up because they've already heard about it. They already think it might be interesting for them. And so generally we're past that point. But the people who wind up wanting to use this technology and who show up talking to us are pretty varied. So we had a spike in business after the law passed in El Salvador, making Bitcoin legal tender there. So we had a couple of different businesses we were working on helping them set up, payment platforms or integrate, Lightning into other systems that they had. So we did that. Now we are seeing a lot of interest, which I'm really excited about, in integrating Lightning payments on the back end of mobile applications. And in some cases, in ways where you're just doing rewards and this type of stuff, and where the customer, in some cases, they definitely know they're getting Bitcoin. In other cases, it's like the customer doesn't even, the user of this app doesn't even realize that Lightning is what's happening on the back end. And that I'm really excited about, because that's when I think it really takes off and becomes really useful. When, someone, if you're a baker, if you're a florist, if you're a dentist, right, this stuff might be really, really interesting, but, you might have a family or someone you're caring for, or whatever the case may be. Like, you don't necessarily have time to just, learn like how a cell phone tower works. You know what I mean? So when someone like that doesn't have to concern themselves with the technology and like how it's actually working to have it be a value add for them, that's really when this stuff takes off. So I'm excited about seeing the progression of, who's coming to us for help with these things.
But so what would you describe as the value add? Like if somebody says to you, well, hey, I'm already taking payments on Visa and MasterCard, why do I need this? Like, what's the point of having that integration? What's the upside for them as a business?
So as a business, it's a clear upside, because Visa, I mean, it depends, but it could take like 3% out of everything you're making, Plus, it might not, that, payment might go through, it might appear to go through instantly, but the actual settlement of it could, take much longer after that, a couple days, and then it might be even months after that, where you could have chargebacks and that money just gets pulled back out of your account, etc. So for a merchant, the sell is pretty clear, right? This is basically like cash, only instant and at a fraction of what you're already paying in fees. So that sell is quite clear. The sell for a user's perspective, if you're in the first world and you already have, Venmo and all the other different things, you're like, and you're not a tech nerd who cares about, efficiency of payment networks, then you're just like, what do I care, right? So that becomes more complicated. But what I think happens there is that you have cool new applications that really are only going to work on the Lightning Network. So things like paywalls, like paying a fraction of a cent to go view some website or read things. We are starting to see some of that now with like the Albi browser, but I think it'll still be a little while before that can happen without even user realizing what's going on. Lightning and gaming is really, really interesting. And there, I think you will get users that'll want to do it because they can exchange this value, just instantaneously and very, very cheaply. And so you can have all kinds of different rewards and, things that'll go on in gaming. But going back to the humanitarian stuff, going outside of the first world, just being able to do cross-border payments, like not having to use MoneyWire, MoneyGram, whatever those, things are that take a massive percentage, or even when two people are in the first world. Me and my husband lived in Australia for a while, and we would sometimes, send money back and forth with the family in Chicago. And there'd be times like I'd have to drive down to the bank, fill out a form, do all of this. It would take 3 days. Something would go wrong at the bank in New York. It would get rejected. I've lost $200 in the process. I have to drive back to the bank. You know what I mean? It was just ridiculous. Like, why is this so hard? And so just in that case, any of those cross-border payments, I mean, the Bitcoin network, not even Lightning, just Bitcoin network itself just has a massive advantage. So
that's fascinating. What would so I've got a whole bunch of things here. So I wanted to ask you, okay, we've done the honor. What would a business look like in the future that's on like the Lightning networks? How would it look, or would it look any different to what it does now? Or is it just that this stuff's all happening in the background and nobody sees it?
In the first world, barring any horrific financial crises, I think what we'll see in 10, 15 years is that you can just install this browser or this plugin on your browser, and then you can forget about all the various paywalls and different sort of things. You'll just go read an article and something will pop up. Are you willing to pay half a cent to read this? And you'll be like, sure, boom. And then you read the article. If you might have all kinds of different applications on your phone that send you rewards for doing all types of different things. Maybe you'll actually have some sort of healthy eating app that sends you a reward when you type in, all what you ate for dinner. And that's so annoying to do on those applications, right? Maybe it'll just like send you a little reward, bing, you got something. It'll be all kinds of rewards where it's like, hey, you just there's like ones they have now, I think it's the Fold one, where you can go buy things using Bitcoin, and then you get like rewards, like you get to like spin a wheel and win something, this type of stuff. So I think there'll be all kinds of, I think there'll be a lot of things we buy and sell, or, transactions we're making, they get switched onto the Lightning Network without us even realizing it. So maybe if we're buying something via some sort of app or, whatever it is, it might all be happening on Lightning without us realizing it. And I think we'll have all sorts of streaming APIs. Maybe you just like, I have a VPN app on my phone. Right. So, and then some, like the nice ones, you have to pay like a subscription to them. Okay, I'm going to pay this much a month to use this nice VPN that I put on my phone. Maybe in the future, I'll just download this app, and I also have like a wallet, a Lightning wallet on my phone, or, however they wire it up. But I just have this VPN app on my phone, and I just stream tiny fractions of a cent every time I'm using it while I'm using it, rather than have that subscription. I think things like that, 10, 15 years, there'll be all sorts of things like that happening that for the average dentist or baker or florist or whatever the case may be, they're not even going to have to know anything about Lightning while they're using it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because it's one of the annoying features, I think, of modern day software. That it used to be, you'd buy, I'm at least old enough to remember this, but, you'd buy a disk and you'd stick it in your PC and you'd download your software. But once you'd bought it, it was yours. Now it's like, oh, you have to pay a subscription. And then there might be 3 months where you don't use it. And so it's great for the subscription service because you're just paying continually. But for you, you're not actually using that service. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I've just checked my bank statement. I'm still paying that subscription. I need to cancel it because I don't use it anymore. And then it's like 50 things, But like you say, if it was just streaming,
my husband, it drives him nuts. And like twice a year, he makes us like sit down and go through and cancel all the things we're not actually using. And like somehow it just keeps it just constantly increases. He's right to do it. But so I think it's worse. Like some businesses that have subscription models are like, oh, I don't know if we want to adapt to that. This was working well for us. But I think it's definitely an improvement for the consumer. And then also you can talk about like how the web works and Web3 and Web5 and all this type of stuff. And then I think privacy on the internet, of course, most of us have heard the saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? You're paying with your data every time you visit websites. But once we have an internet where instead you can pay tiny fractions of a cent, I think you can stop paying with your data and opt to just send them a penny instead, right? You can do that. Or you might even see it in reverse, where someone's like, I want your data, but I'm going to pay you for sending me your data, Yeah. And so that could be quite interesting. But I think we'll have those instant micro payments happening behind the scenes on so many different applications. Yeah.
It is interesting because it shifts the economy much more to everybody is a consumer and a producer. And so any value that you give, you get to be the beneficiary of. And I think that is a Bitcoin mindset, I'd say, rather than a fiat mindset.
Yes.
It's almost that kind of shift to
And
like a healthier
imagine,
economy.
like, they're just going to Reddit and posting a really valuable comment, and it gets upvoted, and you get paid for having done that. Like, how cool would that be? And so now, I don't know how it's going to play out, but this technology enables that makes that a realistic possibility.
I mean, that's really interesting because I kind of abandoned mainstream media really like over the last kind of year or two, because I just found it was just like corporate propaganda, and I just got to the point where I thought, this is like worthless. I'm learning nothing, and it's all just rage inducing, mostly incorrect information. So I got really into Substack, and I started following a whole bunch of Substackers, and I read like a bunch of their stuff. But there is still a friction point with it where it's like, you get the thing and like, do you want to subscribe? And it would, like you say, be much more seamless if you go and read that article, you just pay something for it rather than having like a regular monthly payment. And they have things like, you can recommend other authors to other people, but you could have like, this is the top read article today. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I'll pay extra sats for that because everybody else is reading. I want to know what I'm missing out on. So definitely make that more seamless.
Yeah, I think so. And it could be a huge, potentially a huge boost for privacy on the internet, because you could just, so right now, people, if they can't monetize something, they just take your data and try and monetize your data. And so if you can just instead directly monetize it, then there's less of a need, less of a demand for them to be scraping all your data. So
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's really interesting to me because I think that we have kind of reached that point where it's like the internet had a really great growth period, and kind of Web 2 has become quite toxic in terms of the user experience being quite violating in some ways, from the financial censorship that you talked about, the data selling and everything else. And we almost now need to shift, like have that kind of shift both technically and, I guess, what's the right word, sort of psychologically, or as a collective, if you like, of humanity, into something that's much more equitable between everybody, where we're all producers and consumers, and we're properly being remunerated for what we do. I think that would be really healthy. So I had a couple of last questions before we drop off I wanted to ask you. So on the topic of education, you've obviously done a ton of it. Would you have any recommendations for people that are looking to get into this space as to, I guess, where they should start? Like, I typically always recommend the Bitcoin standard or the sovereign individual or the fiat standard, but do you have sort of go-to websites or books or things that you're like, this is where you should kind of kick off your education?
I guess oh, sorry, my dog heard something. It's okay. Might be some barking in a moment. So I used to go to Andreas Antonopoulos has a good website where he has all kinds of free material, especially videos. And what I like about Andreas is that he's a very, very technical person, but also can explain things like to, the super tech developer, and can explain things to your mom. You know what I mean? Like, you can do like, both of those. So he has a really good range in being able to explain things, and has a ton of free content, right? So that is a great one, but then it really depends on what you're looking into. I'm actually shortly after this recording a video, which I'm going to put up on the Velas YouTube channel, just on a basic intro into what Lightning is, because I don't really have a good non-technical resource to send people to. So I'm making one, and I'll put it up on my YouTube channel. Yeah.
Oh, okay, noted. Yeah. Well, I'll look for it, but let me know when you've done it if you remember, and then I can share that as well. That would be great.
But I do, professionally, work with developers and training them on this stuff. And then if you're looking for technical education, absolutely, like mastering the Bitcoin network, mastering the Lightning network, those are the go-to. They are required reading at Velas Commerce for our developers. And then,
so everybody knows, they're both Andreas Antonopoulos books.
Correct. He wrote both of them, but with the Lightning network, he also wrote it with Lalu and Renee Picard. So yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. And then the other question I had for you was about networking. So I guess there are two types of people that network in Bitcoin. There's the newbies that actually just want to understand it, and they're like, what's the big deal? And then there are the people that have had their aha moment and are just desperate to find other people that they can talk to.
Yeah.
What would you recommend for both of those two segments as to where they should go?
Absolutely start with like your local Bitcoin meetup. I think that's like definitely the best place to start, especially if are in a large city. There's going to be some sort of events you can go to, and they'll probably be pretty well attended. And I do say that, of course, because that's what worked brilliantly for me. But I think it works, for so many people, just showing up to the event. And especially if you're looking to get into the industry where you think you might want to work in it, like absolutely go to just as many as you can afford to attend. You go to all the conferences, go to all the events, just meet people. And I think people really like that because especially in when there's a bull market and the price is going up, you get lots of new people, right? And so lots of people are suddenly like, I want to do this too. And maybe they don't really get it, or maybe they just think they're going to make lots of money. But when you are someone that showed up to all of the meetups when the price was down, and then a year later, you're like, I want a job. They're going to be like, you know what? I think I trust you a bit more because I know you've been here a while, And so that
Right.
just, going out and meeting those people. And it's I was joking, I was out at an event on Tuesday. It's like joking about bear market versus bull market. And I was like, the parties are a little bit more fabulous in the bull market, I got to admit. But, you build so many really good relationships and build a really solid network in the bear market. So I really think it's a great time to just get out there and just talk to people. And so when everyone's looking to get into the industry, I say, definitely go to the events, just talk to people, just show up and be nice and hang out. You don't have to be any kind of wizard. Just, show up and be like, hi, I'm a decent human being. I'm interested in this stuff. And then attempt to contribute to a project in some fashion. So if you're a developer, that's easy. Find an open source project, just go contribute some code. Of course, it's not easy, but it's clear. The path is clear. But I think a lot of people who aren't technical, like, how could I possibly contribute to this? And it's like, no, when you're, especially me being a developer and then going through the process of now I'm running a business, all of a sudden you realize I can't run a business just on code, like I need marketing, I need administration, I need all of these other things. And so there's so many projects out there that need help and sometimes don't even realize they need help on a wide variety of things. So if you have some of those other skills, almost certainly there's going to be a project somewhere that like could use that help. Yeah. And so just contributing even in a small way here and there really builds your network, which really builds your opportunity in the industry.
That's fantastic. Great advice. Well, thank you so much, Hannah. I really appreciate it. It's been great chatting to you, and I look forward to the session on Lightning.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Thank you.